I'm Sebastian St. James. When I show you a graph of the S&P 500 or the ASX 200, is that adjusted for dividends? It has constituents, actual real physical stocks. If those stocks go ex-dividend, then of course the graph of the stock itself would drop. Does the actual index drop with it, or does it actually adjust for it? That I will answer for you. So, when a stock goes ex-dividend, this is what happens. In the graph you can see the price of the stock drops precipitously, suddenly. Yeah, that's basically how it happens. If $10 per share is moved out of the stock and goes into your hand as cash or electronically transferred in a bank account, then the price of the share has to drop by $10. I mean, it makes sense because the retained earnings within the actual company is now $10 less than it was before, so why would the stock price not drop? The thing we don't know yet is whether the actual index will drop at that exact moment because the stock dropped at that exact moment, or whether they actually do the math and calculate it back in as if you took the dividend, say from BHP, reinvested it and bought it again, which means you've actually lost nothing, and then continued on your merry way. That you could do in real life if you wanted to, and there's no reason why the index fund actually doesn't account for that. So what is the truth there? There's the XAO, which is the All Ordinaries, which is the top 500 stocks. XJO is the ASX 200, which is the top 200 stocks. XJT is the ASX 200 dividends reinvested. Aha! XNT is the ASX 200 dividends reinvested on the ex-dividend date after a deduction of 30% withholding tax not applied to fully franked dividends. If you can follow all that, then you must, by now, get the idea that because there are actually other indices which specifically deal with dividends being reinvested. So clearly, the bog standard index fund, which is BOG-standard index fund, does not have dividends reinvested. I mean, otherwise, why would you have the XJT? It would make no sense at all. This graph shows me the SPX, which is the S&P 500, the normal index, and the SPXTR, which is the S&P 500 total return, which has dividends reinvested for 35 years. It's a red line, it's a blue line, and there's a big difference in how they've performed. Well, what's the top line? It's the red line quite clearly. Is that the one that retains its dividends? Well, let's have a look. And yes, it is. It is the S&P 500 total return with the dividends actually reinvested in it, and it's done a lot better than the blue line, which does not have its dividends reinvested, and that blue line is the normal S&P 500. So there's your answer. Any normal index, unless it specifically has total return in the name, is actually assuming that when you get paid out, you don't put it back straight into the index. Because not everybody does. You can take the money, you can actually live off it. The astute amongst you will have noticed that last year, the type of graphs which I showed on my channel, and this year, the type of graphs I've shown on my channel, are actually quite different. They look different, they kind of act a bit different, and there's a good reason why they are different. And that is, over the holiday break, I spent a lot of my time actually programming up personally a brand new charting software. So today, let's have this as a formal introduction to exactly what my charting software can do, why I wrote it, and exactly how simple it actually is to get it to work. In previous videos, we've been creating the Market Simulator Mark II. That's the whole idea of getting the entire history of the market, whatever index you're following, and actually using that data for special simulations later on. And here it is. This is the actual returns of the S&P 500 every single day of its history. You can see we have the 16th of the 12th, 2022, right back to the 3rd of January, 1928. Probably before you were born. But I've got this data. I have years worth of data. Do you know what? If you have an index and you have the data of the index, if you're clever enough, you could actually plot that. Do a graph of the index. You've got the data. If you've got the skill set to go with it, there's no reason why you can't actually produce graphs. So that's what I've done. So I'm taking the data like the IVV, which you're seeing right there in raw form, and I produce a graph like this. This is the IVV, the Australian version of it, over the last 14.9 years, and that's a graph. Wow, there you go. This is the SPX, or the S&P 500, versus the XJO, which is the ASX 200 over the last 30.1 years. Wow, that's longer than I've been alive. Once again in percentage, starting at 0. The graphs always start at exactly the same point on the left-hand side because presumably we're trying to compare one graph against another. That's the only reason why I plot two graphs on the same chart. Blue is in front, and then red is in front, and then blue, well, basically blue wins, doesn't it? Blue is the S&P 500, the SPX, and the XJO or the ASX 200. Didn't do so well, did it? No. The astute amongst you may have noticed a little watermark on all my graphs, the new ones at least. And there it is, it's the Sebastian St. James watermark. This is actually 100% my own intellectual property, this software I've created from scratch. In making this charting software, there was a number of decisions I had to make along the way, and I'll explain them to you. First of all, country codes. IVV, yes, but which one? Okay, so IVV is the iShares Core S&P 500 ETF, yes. And this is IVV, which is the iShares S&P 500 ETF. Okay, it doesn't have the word core. They both have IVV as the ticker symbol. But if I put them side by side, aha, here we go. The top one is Australian dollars, 37.94. The bottom one, we don't know. It's a mystery. It just says $389.85 of some mysterious country. On the top one, we have a management fee of 0.04%. On the bottom one, we have an expense ratio. I don't know why they've used different terms, but they have, for 0.03%, which presumably makes it cheaper. So what is the difference? Well, the top one is the Australian version of the IVV, and the bottom one is the US version. Because only one you can actually buy on the ASX. The other one, no, you have to go overseas, catch a plane. No, you can simply buy it as a foreign stock, but there is a difference, and if you just type in IVV, you may not know which one you're going to get. So if I was to show you a graph, for example, of IVV over the last 14.9 years, which IVV? I have no idea. There's no way I could possibly tell based on the graph and based on the ticker symbol IVV. It actually doesn't tell me. However, if I put in a country code, which in this case is .au, then quite clearly that stands for Australia, now there is no confusion. So if I want to graph IVV US and IVV AU, because I'm using country codes on all my stocks, you always know which one I'm talking about. And there they are. These are the country codes I'm using at the moment. .au, .us. In the future, if I'm tracking Chinese stocks or British stocks or anything else like that, they'll all have country codes. The next big challenge, as far as representation was concerned, is deciding how I'm going to represent my indices. This is the All Ordinaries, and it has the symbol XAO. Interesting. Yeah, well, it definitely says All Ordinaries. And here is the All Ordinaries that has the caret AORD. Well, hang on, that's not even the same. XAO, and here, caret AORD. That's not even the same, and yet it calls itself the All Ordinaries. That's really weird. First, that little symbol, the little hat symbol. What is it actually? Well, it is a caret. Caret is the name used familiarly for the caret symbol, provided on most QWERTY keyboards by typing Shift 6. And why is it called a caret, for goodness sake? Well, it comes from the old days of doing proofreading, where if they needed to insert something, insert something later, they used to use the caret symbol, that little pointing up. Incidentally, you can put a caret on top of a letter, so you could have A with a little symbol on it, in which case that's not a caret, it's a circumflex. And we might call it in mathematics, when I did maths, it was called hat, for example, a hat. Really, the only difference is it over something, in which case it's a diacritic, or if it's not, if it's beside something, a letter on its own, then it's a caret. Not to be confused, of course, with a carrot, which is a type of root vegetable. And not to be confused with carat, which is a unit of mass. Like in gemstones, how many carats does it weigh? And not to be confused with carat with a K, which is a fractional measurement of purity, like 24 karat gold. And not to be confused with Barbara from Bankworld.
I've got a problem with your credit card rewards program.
You mean carrot? Can't achieve rewards regardless of time? What about it?
So confusing, we should ban the word carrot. I think it'd be safer for all of us. Here is the All Ordinaries, which they're giving the symbol AOI, but the All Ordinaries can also be known as caret, AORD, XAO, and of course AIO, which I just showed you. So which is it? Well, unfortunately, it's all of these. It depends. The US tends to use different symbols for even Australian indexes. This is the All Ordinaries. We own it, but you go over to the US and no, they're not even using the right symbol. This is the S&P 500 index, which can be known as .INX. Yeah. It can also be known as caret GSPC, $SPX, SPX on its own, or .SPX or .INX. Goodness! No wonder we're confused. So in writing my own charting software, I had to come up with a standardized way of cutting through this mess and hopefully coming up with standardized terms. In Australia, we actually don't even use the caret symbol. There it is. This is the ASX 200. It's the XJO. It's not caret. XJO. Overseas, I tend to stick an A in front of it. The XJO can be called AS51, which is nuts, or .A XJO. Okay, it's got the XJO in it, so it's got the .A in front of it. Or caret A XJO, or just A XJO. So my rules for indices is choose the commonest form. So I'm not going to choose something that nobody hardly ever uses, and particularly for Australian indices, I'm not going to use American terms. So for example, it'll be using the XJO, not the AXJO. And I've decided not to use carets. I told you I was going to ban them since Australian index don't natively use them. For example, here are some of the Australian index codes. XDL, this is the ASX 20. The ASX 50 is XFL, XTO, XJO, okay, you know that one, XVI. None of them are using the caret symbol, so if we don't in Australia, then in my charting software, I'm not going to use carets either. I'll go to my broker at the moment. I can type in XAO, which I've done here. No caret needed. And there you go. It actually brings up the All Ordinaries. In writing my own charting software, the next thing is I had to decide what I'm going to call the symbols or the codes. They actually mean the same thing, or ticker symbols. It all actually means the same thing. But I found that different countries actually call them different things on average. If I go to the ASX website, this is the official ASX website. They talk about ASX codes. So that's more commonly used in Australia. Over to NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange, we find about symbols. So in my videos, I might interchangeably use the word code or symbols. I'm sure I have in this video, but in my software, I'm going to use the word code because that's more Australian. So here we go. Let's say I want to actually plot something on a graph in my charting software. What does it look like? Step by step. First of all, I hit the graph button and it gives me a choice of codes to choose from. There we go. There's IVV, which is the S&P 500. I actually recognize all of those. And let's say I'm going to tick XAO, which is what? The All Ordinaries. Yes, you should know that. And XJO, which is what? ASX 200. Let's say I want to plot them against each other. Basically, I just tick whichever ones I want to chart against each other and hit the next key. Something magical happens. What it actually does is it has a look at all the dates, all the data and the history of whatever codes I've chosen. And then it tries to line them up. So if this one started in 1929 and this one started in 1964, then it would bring the starting date up to where both indices actually existed. And if the end date, which could be today, but let's say on one of them I don't have all the data, I may only be up to last week, then it would bring down the final last date to when both indices actually existed. So that's automatic. Well, it's not really. I had to program it in step by step, but it has, in the software which I've written, automated the process and will find the common dates, the furthest range from the most early to the most late, and that exactly was the dates it'll put in. So let's have a look at this. The date range it's chosen based on the codes which I've had is from 1992, 11, 23. Why that date? Well, it just happens to be the data that I've got in the database up until this year. Yeah, basically a day or two ago. Interestingly, I can actually go back and add in a different code, and if for some reason, like the IVV, it has a slightly different date range, then it would shrink that accordingly. So here it is. This is the XAO, which is the All Ordinaries, versus the XJO, which is the ASX 200 over the last 30.1 years. Wow, that's forever. And of course, basically being the same stock exchange, it makes sense that they'd be on top of each other. But as we zoom in, we notice that blue has actually won over the entire period of time, which is the All Ordinaries. So if you've ever thought to yourself, is the ASX 200 better? Is the All Ordinaries better? There is your answer over the entire history where both data sets existed. So what is the difference in return? Well, I have a nice little chart, which actually just within the last 2 days I've actually coded up, which will tell me the return of whatever I'm graphing. It gives it to me in a table. Here is, once again, the XAO versus the XJO over the same 30.1 years. However, it actually gives me the return. So over that 30.1 years, in the All Ordinaries of 408.7%, or if you want to go the ASX 200, then is 391.6%. What is that per year? That's where we bring in CAGR, compound annual growth rate. This is a fascinating formula which actually does the following. If I have compounding growth, so let's say I get 10% a year, so I've got $100 now, and it's 10%, so next year I have $110. So next year it'll be 10% of the $110, so obviously my return is going to get larger, and the next year it will get larger again, so it is compounding over time. Okay, this is fairly basic, but what happens is if I've got a final figure, what I can't do quite so simply is just to work my way back. So if I have a 10% return over 10 years, what I can't do is get the final figure and divide it by 10 and work out actually what my interest rate is. It can't work like that because it is compounding, and therefore you need a magical formula to work backwards. Fortunately, I've done all the math for you. This is the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate. This is the percentage per year. If you invested it for 30.1 years, you would get exactly the total return. So in this case, the All Ordinaries has a CAGR of 5.55% and the XJO has 5.43%. Hang on, is the stock market returning 5.5%? Why is that? Well, remember, this is not including dividends. So you have to add, 4 or 5% on top of that. So if you're at home and you're saying, aha, CAGR makes sense to me, I'd like to calculate that myself. Well, today you can. And there's a formula. CAGR equals EV, which is the ending value, divided by BV, which is the beginning value, to the power of 1 over N, which is the number of years, minus 1, told times by 100. Oh, so straightforward for you. Some of you may want to leave that math to me, and therefore, that's okay. I will do it on your behalf. So this software, because it's written by me for the ground up, is more or less specifically written so it produces things which make sense for my videos. So it's all very tailor-made. I can show graphs of any comparisons I'm making. Automatically, I'm using percentages because I'm always comparing one thing against another. I'm rarely interested in the underlying figures. Oh, this went up from 4,000 points to 5,000 points. I'm more interested in percentage return and getting those actual total returns and CAGR figures. That makes a lot of sense to include that data in my videos going forward. And basically, as long as I can get the raw data from my data providers, and I can't get everything, certain things I wanted and it just doesn't exist, but as long as I can get the raw data, I can graph absolutely anything. Let's say you don't want to go broke in retirement. That is a very good idea, in which case you better watch this video here, or if you've seen that, watch this.